proposed by developing countries. Unfortunately, it was not accepted. There was no consensus around the agenda item on doubling the adaptation finance goal. So the only channels we have at the moment is making sure that through the biennial update reports or by developed countries, we are able to clearly see how the doubling of the adaptation finance is taking place. So that's just a note on that. And then we go to something else. I'll just pick 3 agenda items and then we can continue. So I'll go to the loss and damage funding arrangements. And I know a lot was said yesterday. I run the risk of redundancy. But as we know, honestly, we wanted an agenda item which we got with caveats, the Glasgow dialogue being one of them, that discussions on loss and damage funding will not entail liability and compensation. And thirdly, that it will be within the principles of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. So therefore, now we have the decision on the funding arrangements for loss and damage. Within that decision, colleagues, one of the things that is key is that this was a huge win, yes, but at the same time, the decision is very balanced. There were quite some compromises made, because then bringing on board developed countries was to be under the assurance of a couple of things. From the decision perspective, one was that we are not just talking about a fund, we are talking about funding arrangements. So we are not just talking about a funding facility. So the way the decision is structured is that it talks about establishing new funding arrangements for loss and damage, for addressing loss and damage. So that means anything and whatever may come might be considered as a funding arrangement, all right? So that's one. And then secondly, as part of those funding arrangements, the fund would be there. So as we are moving forward to COP28, now the transitional committee is supposed to work out on modalities of operationalizing the funding arrangements, not just the fund. So, and these funding arrangements, this is the second part of it, are to assist developing countries. So the entire thinking around the principles of the Convention on equity, CBDR, etc. When you talk about assisting, then it's assisting. You can run into an ODA, official development assistance. You can look at financial instruments that assist. And then we have to structure, therefore, our thinking from the base of what really is it that we are looking forward to working for the continent of Africa within the context of, yes, a fund, but importantly, what are the principles of the funding arrangements that we must not deviate from? If not, we will run into a risk, which we might want to talk about more from now henceforth. The last agenda item I'll pick on, I said we had about an average of 10. So I'll just speak on the last one, which is largely the guidance to the GCF, the guidance to the GEF. And just to start out with the GCF, so we had a couple of things playing out at the COP. One was, where do we really structure the work that is going on with the gender discussions on enhancing implementation of the gender action plan? And now the GCF has been encouraged to figure out how within its funding windows, work to finance to countries can flow, to developing countries can flow to support implementation of gender actions. That's one. Secondly, the GCF found or received guidance on its private sector strategy. And this guidance is really unique because then it provides space for local SMEs and MSMEs in the context of ensuring that the GCF develops approaches and instruments that can be tapped or can be leveraged by local private sector entities. So it means therefore that we are building on what we saw last year, where the GCF was asked to figure out ways to enhance access of finance by organizations at the local level, private sector and civil society organizations. I'm trying to pick on one last one. So the GEF. The GEF is an important fund within the context of the Paris Agreement. For one key reason, it's supposed to provide finance to developing countries to implement and operationalize the enhanced transparency framework. So all the reporting under the enhanced transparency framework talk about the biennial transparency reports and many other reports that we should undertake as developing countries are supposed to be supported. So the GEF essentially provides support to developing countries for the implementation of these reports. And it did receive also an additional guidance. Well, it was encouraged to provide additional financing. And then secondly, under the GEF is that in Madrid, no, in COP26 last year, we had a win when it comes to developing countries being supported to determine their needs and cost them. So if you're asked, what are your needs as a country on climate change, and how much do we, or how much are they worth, so that we can think about an investment criteria to the needs. So
thank you, Julius.
I wanted to conclude, but the mic has concluded me. Yeah. So Jeff was essentially asked to see how it can provide support to countries to identify their climate change needs and cost them moving forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Julius. Thank you for providing such a very, very good summary on where we are on climate finance. And of course, we've talked about the 100 billion goal and the progress report, but it probably as a follow-up question, it will be nice to hear from you exactly where we are in terms of achieving that, and whether we are on progress. And of course, we also talked about the loss and damage funding arrangements, and you've agreed with what we, of course, talked yesterday in terms of needing to engage with the transitional committee in terms of the work that you are going to do in coming up with the operational modalities. Then you talk about the GCF and GEF, and in terms of GCF, I know next year there'll be the next replenishment for 2024 to 2027 is coming up next year. What do we expect in this replenishment, and probably how do we engage? Yeah. Yes, please.
All right, so answering the few questions, where are we on the 100 billion goal? I think that's one of the questions we need to ask developed countries, because these are developed country commitment. However, looking at different reports, we are averaging at about 42 to 45 billion per year, all right? And if you look at the OECD, that's through the official 100 billion reports. If you look at the OECD, which I don't like quoting, and I also, because it's not on a formal report, they talk about an average of 82 billion per year. So no, as at now, not per year, but as at now, it means that we have fallen short of the previous years from 20, or was it Copenhagen was 2009? Up to now, we are only at 82 cumulatively. And the challenge here is the dodginess, because then we are counting cumulative, not per year. So there's a shortfall that is not accounted for. We tried to introduce that language in COP27. It made its way into the first round of the cover decision. However, it did not find its way through the final text of the cover decision, where we were calling for the accountability or the accounting of the shortfalls of the 100 billion. The GCF replenishment, yes, next year. And from a COP guidance perspective, so not really going into the GCF replenishment process, from a COP guidance perspective, I know developing countries who are very strong when it came to the importance of the COP to lay ground in terms of the ambitiousness of the replenishment process itself, in line with Article 11.4 of the convention. So we did want to introduce language where the COP would speak to the need for the replenishment process to be ambitious, to respond to the needs, and it was impossible, because then developed countries said that the needs conversation is talked about in a separate process. So we have to still work out the mechanics of how to make sure the GCF is replenished in an ambitious way, in particular COP providing guidance or overarching policy direction on the amounts around the replenishment. Do we have a doubling of the commitments? Do we have a tripling of the commitments? And how do we do that? I think lastly, Obed, just to say, we also had something on the MDBs. It was a very unique COP, because we had an MDB reform, a kickstart of an MDB reform package. So the MDBs were spoken to very strongly in the cover decision, particularly the CMA cover decision. And we are looking at a decision that asks the MDBs to do a couple of things in light of the global climate emergency. One of them is review their financial practices and also priorities. And then number two is looking at how they can increase climate ambition by looking at the possibilities of exploring the breadth of policy, financial policies and instruments that they use. So there'll be interesting conversation moving forward into next year. But I think a lot of the financing that we need for the climate emergency must come through Article 2.1c, complemented by Article 9. And Article 9 is the heart of meeting the needs of developing countries. And then 2.1c, looking at finance flows consistent with the pathway, comes in to complement and take on the huge chunk of the transitional issues that we have to deal with. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Julius. I know finance issues can be quite technical. So please, I ask you to write down your questions. Then during the question and answer session, Julius can clarify some of the issues. I know we've not touched on the NCQG, and that's one of the areas probably we would like you to touch on when you respond to the questions. Allow me to change gear and go straight to Tracy. I know, Tracy, you're following capacity building at the COP, and as a key means of implementation, just like finance, capacity building is quite fundamental in achieving the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the convention. So please, may I ask you to give us a quick snapshot on what happened in COP27 with regard to capacity building? What is the progress? What are the emerging issues and areas that we need to focus on as we head towards COP28? Over to you.
Thank you, Obed. Yes, capacity building, it's quite fundamental. And for COP27, the focus really was more on, trying to enhance ownership.
And put your mic closer to you.
Okay. So the focus was much more on looking into the technical reports of the capacity building, or the PCCB, and the Committee on Capacity Building. And the most important thing that we have to look into, there seems to be no ownership. There seems to be a bit of gaps in how we embrace capacity building. And this I'll take to the technical report that was produced by the Committee on Capacity Building. And actually it outlined a lot of things, the findings that were done, particularly on assessing the gaps and the needs of the countries. And, it also informs the capacity building work plan for 2021-2024. The assessments that were conducted, what is worrying is countries were called to, to submit their capacity needs, their capacity gaps. And among all the countries, only 16 countries responded. From the developing countries, we only had 8 responding to this assessment. And, we sit in meetings, as African countries, and then we say we don't have capacity. But what is it that we are doing to meet the efforts, to try and address our capacity needs, our capacity issues? So you find that these assessments are very important in outlining the foundation of how we can improve, how we can take ownership of our capacity needs, how we can implement projects on the ground, how we can implement, be it issues of accessing finance, be it issues of adaptation, of mitigation, implementation, be it capacity within understanding itself the climate action that we are taking on. So my presentation, I've tried very much, because I want to move from the technical, I've tried very much to look at what is the progress, what are we going to do for the next year. 2023, the focus of the committee, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, will be on supporting developing countries in developing and implementing their national adaptation plans. So this is where, as Africa, we need to take action. Countries are at different levels of developing their national adaptation plans. Others have finalized, but we need to see, do they have the capacity to implement those adaptation plans. And those that have not yet developed their adaptation plans, what is it that they need to be assisted with? So going into 2023, the work of the Paris Committee will be focusing on assisting these developing countries. And it is our role as civil society to pitch in. It is our role as civil society to pitch in and see how we can intervene and assist as the implementation of this action plan. So just to go back, or in reference of this support for adaptation, our starting point will be to assist, help, or foster the developing countries, help developing countries foster ownership, try to own efforts on capacity building. In this way, they can be able to maintain capacity for climate action. If there's no ownership, then it will be hard. So we need to, and also it is important to point out that efforts that were made in identifying the experiences of enhancing can also help to inform our action going forward. The gaps that were identified by the technical report of the PCCB can help also outline how we can improve in building capacity for adaptation plans at the national level. And like I mentioned, it's a bit worrying that, countries are not coming forward. And we have to nudge, we have to engage our governments in dialogues that the PCCB has opportunity to assist you to develop your national adaptation plans. So take a central role as civil society, take a central role in advising, in even, coming in as resource people to assist our governments to see the importance of improving their plans. So as we move to the next action on supporting adaptation, we need to take into consideration all the processes of capacity building. And this should start with identifying our capacity needs, looking into the planning and designing of capacity interventions, looking at capacity building